ladies and gentlemen. Shall we begin with the first question? Yes.
How would you respond to the claim that self-esteem is most readily achieved and maintained if one bases one's self-esteem merely upon the fact that one exists, that one is a person, rather than upon being a particular kind of person and living up to a particular set of standards?
Well, I would respond, first of all, with a simple observation that it can't be done, and that to suggest that one will esteem oneself simply and solely on the grounds that one exists means that one doesn't understand what the concept of self-esteem is all about. There is perhaps a certain irreducible, primitive kind of self-value that every conscious living organism feels toward itself simply by virtue of existing, an almost animal-like concern for self, which is really on a sub-self-esteem level. But self-esteem rises out of the fact that man is a being of volitional consciousness, a being who has to respond to the alternatives that life presents him with by means of choices, and that he can move in many different directions in terms of the kind of person he can become and the kind of choices and decisions that he can make in the context of moral situations. Self-esteem is a concept pertaining to valuation. Valuation implies and necessitates the concept of alternatives. Now, if it's simply an issue that I am good because I exist, this is not a logical concept in the context of self-esteem because there are no alternatives. If I'm dead, the problem of self-esteem doesn't arise. If my self-esteem is based merely upon the fact that I exist, then it really has nothing to do with me as an individual, nothing to do with my particular choices, doesn't in any way relate to my personal responsibility. So that paradoxically, this view, which might claim to be very benevolent and humanitarian in its implications, is really on a philosophical level not unlike a seemingly opposite religious view, which would hold that man is damned or enjoys grace entirely at God's discretion or will, and in no wise on the basis of his own choices or performance, that he's either good or he's damned according to God's decree, but he has nothing to do with it. Now, if that view offends us intellectually, one of the reasons why it offends us is surely because it attempts to divorce the notion of good and bad or good and evil from the agent, the acting person who is being described as good or evil, and placing this responsibility instead into the hands of God. Well, what it shares in common with the view of which you speak is in a different sense entirely, but still leading to the same result. Your worth is not a concept which ties to your choices or your decisions. Therefore, is not up to any factors to be determined by you, since you don't determine the fact that you exist exactly. Existence is thrust upon you, we might say. And furthermore, if one wanted to say that you should like yourself or consider yourself good just because you exist, I would say, why, fine, but then you'll need another word to name that psychological state of self-affirmation that man feels, and self-approval, to the extent to which he lives up to his own moral standards, or that state of moral disapproval that he feels when he betrays or acts against his own standards. Meaning that there is a real fact of reality there that we have to take cognizance of, that a person likes himself more when he acts as he thinks he should act, and likes himself less when he acts against his own convictions in matters where he had the knowledge and ability to act differently. In other words, where a voluntary choice and decision was involved. In other words, that's a fact of human psychology we cannot escape from. And therefore, while I'm not meaning to imply that it's not natural and good and desirable for a person to value himself as a living organism. Obviously, it's very desirable and it's very good. Whether we tell man in so many words that self-esteem has to be earned, has to be achieved, or not, he will discover that anyway. It's a fact of reality that perhaps on a wordless level, but nonetheless, he will come up against and encounter. And we cannot say, it's psychologically absurd to say, that whether a man conscientiously lives up to his standards or acts in flagrant, irresponsible disregard of them makes absolutely no difference to the way he estimates or evaluates himself, or that it should make no difference. This isn't merely false, it's just naive, it's silly. Yes, next question.
Would you comment on the theoretical source of the view that a patient must learn to adjust to his neurosis, and what is your evaluation of that view?
Well, to begin with, that view doesn't have a theoretical source. It has a practical source, the therapist's inability to cure his patients. Therefore, he generates the notion that the best we can hope for is that you will somehow arrive at a semi-satisfactory adjustment to your neurosis. My reason for saying that is simply that it would be preposterous on a medical level to tell a person that he must adjust to his illness. We say no, illness has to be fought. We have to strive to overcome it. We adjust to it only in the sense that we don't deny its reality if it's there. But neither do we passively resign ourselves to it unless it's an illness which is incurable. Now, to tell people that they must adjust to their neurosis is tacitly to tell them that they must view psychological problems as uncorrectable, to which my response would be, well, who says so? What's the justification for that assertion? People do solve psychological problems, and they solve them every day. And what separates the men from the boys, so to speak, is those who are willing to, quote, adjust to their neurosis, and those who are unwilling to do so. And I have a lot of admiration for the people who are unwilling to do so, and none for the people who are willing to do so. So therefore, my evaluation of that position, to answer your question literally, is that it is wrong and nonsensical, and as far as anybody advocating it, it's a flagrant rationalization intended to justify therapeutic ineptitude or incompetence.
Assuming sufficient time, is your goal in psychotherapy always to achieve a fundamental alteration or restructuring of the patient's psychology, or are your goals sometimes more modest?
Very often more modest. In fact, I wouldn't quite set up the situation in the way you describe. To begin with, my goals in psychotherapy are crucially set, not by me, but my client or patient. In other words, when he comes to see me, he comes for particular problems that he would like help with. I don't see my role as that of telling him that I will now proceed to reorganize and change his entire personality, whether that is what he wants from me or not. A person may come in, for example, because he is suffering from migraine headaches, which his physician has informed him has its cause in some psychological conflict. Then as a therapist, I might attempt to help him get rid of his migraine headaches. He might have other psychological problems that I may recognize, but that he may not wish to get into with me. So it's not merely an issue of time, it's an issue of what his desires are, what he wants, because you cannot force psychotherapy on a person. That's only point one. Secondly, not everyone who comes to therapy requires a radical restructuring or alteration of his psychology. Not everybody's problems are equally fundamental. Now, it's true that many people come to therapy with problems that do require a lot of rather major changes in their fundamental orientation toward life